Well, excited today to have with me in the studio Terry Borcheller. And Terry, I was looking back in the programs that we've done over the years, and the last time that you were here was in May of 2020, so it's been some time. And the reason I'm excited, we got a lot of comments on the last time that you came in and we discussed some things relative to the Christ in you reality. It's because they were intrigued by one thing because of your background and your vocation as a professional race car driver, especially those that are into racing. And so Terry's raced all over the world. He is a 7-time professional champion in numerous types of races. So kind of bring us up to speed, Terry. Welcome back to Life as God Intended.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks, Don. Yeah, I always enjoy coming down and seeing you, and we're friends as well, so that makes it easier. But racing, I thought I was done. I hadn't raced a full season, and I raced professional sports cars, so 24 hours of Daytona, 12 hours of Sebring, Le Mans. Enthusiasts will recognize those races. In 2014 was the last time that I ran a full season, and I thought that I may be done, but I was still trying to, get rides, and I still had a desire to do what I have done my whole life, pretty much. And it was very few and far between. I did maybe a handful of races from that point until last year. And it's funny because, God has taken me down this path before where I thought that my desire, like everything that I was really wanting to do, was not going to happen. And then out of the blue, it was like overnight, just boom. And I was like, seriously, like, how did that happen? And then you kind of look and go, okay, God, that's really funny that you decided to do it that way, because it was at the point where I realized I was not going to get it done. It wasn't going to happen by my own energies and work and anything I could figure out. It wasn't going to happen. And it was a total surprise, and it's been incredible. It's been a great opportunity to get back racing professionally. It's the Pirelli GT4 America series, which all the races are live on YouTube, and then they keep them on the YouTube channel, so you can go back and look at even the whole season. We did 14 races this year, 7 different cities across the country, all in North America, but super exciting.
Well, I know you enjoy the racing, and did you guys win some of those as well?
Well, the co-driver that I have is brand new. That was part of the reason that I ended up getting the ride, because I was coaching him as well. And so it's been a lot of work with him, just getting him to the point where we could be competitive. And our goal was to finish in the top 10 all year. And that's what I kind of beat into him is, it's not just about your speed, it's about finishing races, because that's how you win championships. And so that's what we did, and we accomplished the goals all the way through until the second to the last race, which we won, which was a complete just an incredible, it was at Indy as well, so it was just really an incredible finish, and just a great stamp on our season, because we've been working so hard. And then the next race, which was the second race at Indy, we were leading, and then he ended up crashing, and so that was kind of a, we got both ends of the spectrum in one weekend, but it was amazing. I mean, it was really good, and but that last race was the only race we didn't hit our goal. So next year we're going for top 5s in all the races. That'll be our goals, and hopefully try to fight for a championship. And it's a 3-year contract, so that's even better. Those are rare, especially at my age. Most guys are retired from sports car racing. They can't necessarily stop working, but they're out of racing by the time they're in their 40s, late 30s even. So I feel so incredibly blessed to be able to do what I love, not only my whole life, but even now into my 50s. So it's been amazing.
Well, that's great. Well, it's kind of about the topic that we're going to discuss today, because you went from winning the race to crashing a race. And it's kind of like, okay, how do we manage our expectations in between? But before we get into that subject, when you weren't kind of racing from that 2014 until this past year, it's not like you kind of got out of what your heart was, and that was racing. And so you kind of got involved in a ministry to these drivers. Tell us briefly a little bit about that ministry.
Yeah, I've coached also most of my career as well. I worked at the Bob Bondurant School of High Performance Driving early on, and then I've always kind of had that coaching aspect along with the racing. So I've been making a living coaching, so I'm in the environment of the racing community. But in 2014, Richard Anderson, who was the founder of Motorsports Ministries, the ministry's been in operation since 1984. He passed away of esophageal cancer. His family had asked me if I would be the intern, and I'm like, yeah, I'll do it, just to finish out the year. But and they wanted me to do it to if I was open to it, they wanted me to do it for the next year as well. And I said I can't make that commitment because I'm racing full time still. And I didn't want to do both at the same time. So at the end of 2014, I'm like, okay, that was fun, that was good. I was able to encourage a lot of people. But now I'm going to go racing, and they're going to have to figure out what to do with the ministry. Well, what was interesting was I didn't realize after 25 years plus that for the first time I wasn't going to have a job. I wasn't going to have an opportunity to race. And of course I was frustrated, and I mean literally the first race I went to, Daytona is usually the first race of the year at the 24, and I'm thinking, well, I don't have a ride for the year, but I'll get a ride for at least the 24, because you can usually, a good driver can usually get a ride at least for that race. And there was nothing. It was like I just ceased to exist in regards to that opportunity. And so I called up Jennifer and her mom, and I said, look, I'll do the ministry, because I don't have a ride. And so that's when I started Motorsports Ministries full time. And then there was several months went by, and after I realized I wasn't going to get a ride for the year, I was praying, and the Lord had been softly speaking, because He's a good father, right? And He knew that I probably couldn't handle it if He said, you're not going to race and you're going to do the ministry. I don't know how I would have taken that, but it was a very, patient, loving, soft communication that let me know that this is what He would like for me to do. And it was amazing. I mean, and what's really incredible is when I first became a Christian in 1987, I woke up in the middle of the night for probably 3 or 4 months, and I just kept logging. I kept a journal, and I just kept logging this ministry. Now, keep in mind, in 1987, I had won a national karting championship in '83. I hadn't done but one car race, and it wasn't even a pro race. It was an amateur race. And then I became a Christian. And now this is my journaling period for 4 months. And what I was journaling was that I was going to have a ministry that went to professional racing venues. I ministered to everyone within the community, the drivers, the crew members, the racetrack personnel, the sponsors, the emergency service workers, the corner workers, all of those that are involved in having a race weekend come together. I would have a ministry that would present the gospel to that community. That was what I wrote down. I call it my vision, because I hadn't raced professionally. And so after I had got that, I'm like, okay, this is how this is going to go down. I'm going to be a professional race car driver, which I always wanted to. And it's not like I was completely out of the field. I had been racing go-karts and had been quite successful in that. But there's a big step from go-karts to racing professionally.
Gotcha.
These are race carts, so they would do over 130 miles an hour. I mean, they were fast carts. So what ended up happening was I really believed that God had asked me to do a mission trip to Ecuador. This was in 1990, and it was a 3.5 month commitment with a team. So once you go down there, you're locked in for almost 4 months. And once I made the commitment, I had an opportunity to actually drive in a professional race. It was like the first big opportunity that I had, and I just remember this. I was so torn because I so wanted to do it, but yet I so knew I really probably shouldn't do it. And I chose to do the mission trip and to not come back or not go, or I just decided I'm going to do the mission trip. And so when I came back, I just thought, you know what, I'm going to be a youth pastor, or I'm going to do something in ministry. I was going to do something, within the church structure. And I just, that's where I thought I was going. And so I came home, I had no money, and I had a door that was supposedly wide open for me when I came back to be engaged in ministry, and that door shut. And I'm like sitting there going, okay, God, what do I don't understand this at all. Like, this isn't going at all according to my expectations. Very early on, right? And so I called up my college and career pastor, and I said, look, here's what's going on. And he goes, well, what's in your heart? Like, what are you really passionate about? What do you want to do? I said, I want to race. I mean, I've always wanted to race. He's like, well, is there anything you can think of that you can be around that environment? And I said, well, I went to one school when I was younger, and I can call out there and see if they can maybe hire me to paint lines or whatever. I mean, it was in Sonoma, California. It was the Bondurant School. That's where they were based then. And so I called out there, and the gentleman that answered the phone that they transferred me to, he's the head of all of the coaches at the school. And I recognized his voice, and I said, Chris? And he said, yeah. I said, this is Terry Borcheller. And he goes, oh, I remember you. He goes, listen, you're not going to believe this. I called to see if I could paint lines at the racetrack. I ended up getting my instructor. He was the gentleman that when I went through as a student, he was my coach. He knew me very well. And he said, we're building a brand new facility in Phoenix, Arizona. Half my guys don't want to leave Sonoma because they're born and raised here. They don't want to go to the desert. He said, would you want to move to Phoenix? And I'm like, he goes, I would make you an instructor. And I go, I'm not qualified to be an instructor. I've only done go-karts and like one car race. He said, I'll put you through, it's like $80,000 worth of classes. I'll train you up. You'll do great. And I'm like, okay, I'm in. And that move was God's way of opening a door for me that I never could have opened myself. And just gave me an incredible opportunity to not only be in a car all the time, but and kind of learn the differences of karts and cars, but also the business of racing. I was taught something I didn't know that I didn't know. And so I'm around all these guys that are, they're successful professional drivers in all of the different facets of motor racing, not just NASCAR, not just sports cars, in all of the different fields. And so it was this incredible pool of guys that I could just glean from and learn from, and it was an amazing journey. And so, long story short, I had an incredible professional career that God completely opened doors and supplied opportunities for me. I had no money. Most people doing what I do, they start with a lot of money, or they start with a family friend or a family business or a friend of a friend's business that has a lot of money, and that's how they start. And I had none of that. I just had hope in God. Like, I think, God's going to open doors for me to do this. And so anyway, fast forward 30 years, and the vision that I had wrote down when I first became a Christian, Motorsports Ministries in 2014, that basically was handed to me on a platter. And it was exactly what I wrote in 1987, which was the year I became a believer. It was almost to the T, the exact thing that I had written down. And keep in mind, when I wrote that down, I hadn't done one professional car race. I'd only done one car race in my whole life. So it was, it was, for me, I was looking back and I was going, okay, this is obviously God. This is incredible. And Motorsport Ministries, they ended up giving me the ministry. They made me the president, which is what Richard was when he passed. The family completely gave it over to me to run, and it's my ministry. They're completely out of it by their choice. And we've got 5 chaplains now. We go all over the country. We do probably 20 to 24 events a year. It's been really incredible. It's been an incredible journey.
Well, that's quite a testimony, and that's a great segue, actually, into what we're wanting to discuss today, because when we had talked here a couple months ago about having you come back and I asked you what was on your heart and what might be the topic that we could discuss. It was managing expectations. So a lot of different expectations that you've had over the years, wanting to be in racing, not being able to be in racing, on the mission field, then having an opportunity, what do I do? And, back and forth. And so with this kind of a subject, the world's performance expectations are always the means by which progress is evaluated. And yet, as Christians, we don't just fall into that standard, do we? Christians should really not have expectations for human world betterment, or for that matter, recognition as far as the world standards, or thinking that the world's going to become a better place that we live in. And so this whole thing of expectations, this properly performing, it takes into consideration the rules, the regulations, and as we bring that into the kind of the Christian community, it's become the basis of religious expectations of obedience and measuring up. And that, of course, runs directly counter to the relational obedience that we as Christians, Christ ones, have. And so there can be this conflict. There can be this confusion. Like, how do I manage my expectations when, I go to work and the boss has an expectation for me? How would you address some of that, Terry?
Well, we discussed this before we started today with the filming, and I had read a devotion that was titled Expectations. And as I was reading the devotion, there was a lot of things that God was really speaking to me personally in regards to the way that I manage my own expectations. And I have a lot of expectations. And I know as humans we're not supposed to, but we do, right? Like, we're always expecting when I
think it's fine to have them. It's what we do with them.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So like I have, as a racer, every time I go to a race, I expect to win. That's just what we do. When I buy a flight, I expect the flight to be on time. And we can take those expectations into anything. When we go into a marriage, we have certain expectations. When we have kids, we have certain expectations. If we do X, they'll do Y. And of course, none of that works. But it is the way that we're programmed. So as I read this devotion, I was really hit with the fact that, I really don't have a lot of control of my expectations. Like, I expect that I'm going to win, but I literally have no control over actually winning, other than what I can do myself to kind of just be. I want to make sure I feel good. I want to make sure I'm hydrated. I want to make sure I'm implementing all of my experience. I'm working as hard as I can with the crew guys to get the car set up right. I mean, all the things that I know to do. But at the end of the day, you cannot predict any race because you never know what's going to happen. And so what is God's perspective? Like, what does it look like to participate with God when my expectations aren't met? And sometimes even when they are, it's what does that look like to participate with God? Because that is living out our Christianity. And so it just really started speaking to me, because when you're in a performance occupation, it gives you a lot of opportunities to not have your expectations met. and again, you can put other equations in there. If you have a wife that's gonna, she's gonna challenge you. If she's a critical thinker and she has her own, depending on what her personality is, it's gonna be, you're gonna have those expectations. Well, this should be an easy expectation. No, it's not gonna be easy. It's gonna be very difficult. So, what is participating with God? What does that look like? And so I started really meditating on that with my devotion. And then the flip side of it was that really, whether the expectation is met or it's not, our goal should always be, what are you doing in this whole thing? What does it actually look like to participate you whenever they cancel my flight? Because I can promise you what I'm going to do is not at all what it looks like to participate with God. I'm going to do completely the opposite. Now, hopefully, after enough of those canceled flights, I'll be able to get it, right, where I go, okay, God, you got a plan here, like I can trust you, and there's something that you're doing. And that opens the door to the relationship that we want to cultivate with God so deeply anyway, but we don't see it coming that way. We see it, you know, I'm gonna spend 5 minutes in prayer this morning, or I'm gonna go on a quiet walk, which again, there's nothing wrong with those things, but the rubber really hits the road with our relationship whenever things go completely the opposite of the way that we're expecting. Mm-hmm. And then we're in a position where we can go, okay, God, I trust you. I don't understand. I trust you. What are you doing here? Why? And I think it's okay to say, why is this happening? There's a purpose going on. It's not just random, and you are in control. There's nothing that escapes your ability. So you have allowed this. You may not have created it to happen, but you've allowed it. So what are you doing? And then the other side of that is, there's two parts to the expectations. The other side is, I've always known that I can expect heaven on the other side. That's something I think as a believer, when you're in union with Christ, you kind of have that security that you've got heaven on the other side. But what I don't always think through, and I don't always believe, I think, is that this is not our home. That was the other side of that devotion that I was just blown away with, because it's like, I know this is not our home, but I don't live like this is not our home so much of the time. And so when I have a major expectation that I'm really hoping for, or I'm really putting stock in, and all of a sudden that expectation doesn't happen, for me to be able to remember and to be able to, again, it is all a relationship with God, for me to be able to interact with the Lord, and to be able to, in that interaction, say, okay, I realize that because I'm so drawn to this being my home, but I know that it's not, what does that look like in relationship with you? And what does it look like for this not to be my home in this situation? Because it just really helps so much. And I feel like I've been able to encourage other people, because so many people look to this world like what we can see. That's so normal. Mm-hmm. But if that's where our focus is, if that's where we're rooted, it's just a matter of time before it's sinking sand or washing away, because it's not gonna last.
Amen.
Yeah, and I don't have it figured out.
No, we never do. But there's a difference between the seen and the unseen expectations. That's kind of what you're saying. And it's easy for us to focus on the seen, you know, and the accomplishments and the goals and the things that we want to, you know, engage in and want to see the end result. But it's not always, it's easier for us to lose sight of the unseen. And so I think a lot of people, you know, find themselves making a statement like, I think I have a right to expect, and then, you know, fill in the blank. I have a right to expect my wife to do certain things, or to treat me a certain way, or I feel like I have a right for my children to excel or behave, or to not make those choices. Or I think
you mentioned something earlier about managing expectations, and I think that's a critical juncture, because there's a big difference between managing our expectations and trying to control them. Yes. Trying to control the expectation, because to manage it, I think you might have said that on the phone call that we had before we came here, but maybe one of the first time you said, what are we going to talk about? And I started really processing the managing of expectations. How do you manage the expectations? It's relational. The only way that I can do something different than what I've always done, my pattern, which is not godly, right, is to be able to, and I can't control or manage anything because God is in charge, but for me to be able to manage expectations, the only way that I know to do that is to say, okay, God, this is on you.
Right.
This is your responsibility. I'm as all I've got to do is try to have my ears open and my eyes open to participate with what you're wanting to do here. And that honestly is the hardest thing, because I would say and it's the difference. It's the transition from Jesus being Savior to Jesus being Lord, because most of the time, if we're honest, we don't want to do that. Whatever it is that we're hearing God do, whatever we're hearing Him say, we don't want to do. Maybe I'm solo on that, I don't know, but I don't want to do what I hear Him say most of the time. I don't want to be kind to the flight attendant whenever she's, during COVID, telling me to wear a mask, or whenever the gate agent's telling me that they're going to cancel my flight, or I don't want to be kind. I don't want to be gentle. I don't want to represent Christ. I want what I want. And I think for me, it is all about the relationship with God, because the only way the only way that I'm going to participate with Christ in those situations is if His power is doing it through me. And it's not just the recognition, it's also the submission, where I'm willing to say, okay, you're Lord and I'm not. And I don't do that so much of the time.
Yeah, and so managing expectations is allowing Him to manage us.
100%. It's relational.
The fruit of the Spirit.
Even the fact that this is not our home. It's like, but we were very fortunate. We had a stupid little shoe dryer caught fire, and I thought our house could have burned down if I hadn't been home, and if I hadn't got to it if I'd have been 5 more minutes, it would have been in the ceiling and the house would have been burned down. And it's like, that kind of caused all of us to go, wow, this could have been, we could have lost everything, but did we really lose everything? Or can we lose everything? If Christ is truly our home, if it's eternal, if He's eternal and that is our home, if we lost all of our possessions here, God forbid people lose their health. I mean, there's so many things that we cling to that we expect to have, but at the end, we have everything in the relationship with Christ. And that's so easy to say, because I don't know how I would have responded if the house would have burned down. I don't think it would have been, let's see, Lord, this is not our home. I know that, so therefore all is well. No, I would have been totally upset. I would have been mired in all of the insurance and the phone calls and the replacement and all the stress, and it would have been terrible. But in the midst of it, I do believe that my relationship with God would have been cemented even more. It seems like the more He takes us through, the more He just continues to cement us.
Well, you mentioned faith, and you also mentioned, kind of your struggle participating with God at those times where I think you said, you didn't want to do. So for some clarity to our listening audience, obviously we all have those propensities, those tendencies, what I refer to as those flesh patterns. But those don't really define us. They're there. We have familiarity with them. But we always are invited by God, by Christ, who is our life, to participate with Him. In other words, He's wanting to live through us in these moments. He's wanting to manage us. He's wanting to manage our expectations. And our receptivity to Him in those moments is what faith is. Faith is simply being receptive to His grace. And so, I think I mentioned the fruit of the Spirit. The last character that's mentioned there is self-control, better understood as the godly control of self. We need somebody to be in control of us, don't we, Terry? Yeah. And we need somebody to manage all these expectations. Ultimately, there's really only one expectation for the Christian, and that's whatever God's up to. And frankly, we don't always fully understand what He's up to, but that's okay because we trust Him. And so we might say that, when we have that, I think that I have a right to expect, and then fill in the blank, which we talked about a moment ago. Too often when that doesn't occur, we tend to blame people. We tend to blame others. My wife or my children, they're being insensitive. They're not having loving attitudes. They don't love me. I don't feel loved. I don't feel respected. When in reality, it's our own issue. It's our own insensitivities. It's our own unloving attitudes. And I think what God helps us to recognize in those moments when we feel like we don't have the want to is that he's our want to, that he's love. And love has no expectations of others. Love has no expectation of response or reciprocation of others. We might say that love has no strings attached. And if that's the case, then we can give those expectations that we have to God and realize that the only expectations that will be fulfilled are the ones that he's put in our hearts. Those are the desires of our hearts. That's the desires that he's placed there. Those are the things that he's wanting to accomplish. And we're learning how to walk with him, how to relationally trust him, and how to lean on him. Because the reality is that God really doesn't have any expectations for you and I in the Christian life, which might come as a shock to some people. And in fact, even God, who is the ultimate essence of love, cannot make anyone feel loved. You know, I think sometimes with our expectations, we're always, you know, if this will just happen, then I'll feel good. If this would happen, I'll feel respected. If this will happen, I'll feel loved. Well, probably not. You see, although God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten Son, the reality is, as you said, we all have to be receptive. We all have to walk by faith. Every person must individually receive the gift of God. We must receive at those times when our expectations aren't fulfilled in the way that we thought they would be fulfilled, that, you know, God's still at work, and I'm content in him. And this is a process of a love relationship, and we're learning and we're determining to go deeper in that love relationship with the Lord and thereby feel loved by God and not have so many expectations on everybody else, or things don't have to necessarily go the way that we thought that they should go. And then we do feel loved. And by the way, that feeling of love is not just an emotion. We're not just talking about something emotional here that, you know, that you can grant to somebody or God can grant to you. No, feeling loved is a decision. It's a decision to accept and appreciate the sentiments and the actions of another, even when that other is obstinate, even when that other isn't what we would wish they would be. And that would also relate to God. You know, God sometimes doesn't measure up to our expectations, but we realize that God is good. And so it's most unrealistic for us to have these unrealistic expectations, to think that others can make us feel a certain way. And no wonder we're disappointed. No wonder we're disillusioned. It's simply a performance trap that will eventually create an alienation in relationships. It'll break down relationships, and we'll be unable to affect any kind of emotional state or change in other people's lives. And so those kinds of unrealistic expectations really become a form of emotional blackmail, where I become the standard that I hold you to because it's my expectations that haven't been fulfilled. That's not the love of God. No one can make another person feel loved. No one can make another person feel happy. Our feelings are the result of our own choices. You know, some of us need to kind of grow up spiritually and realize that we choose to be the conduits of God's one-way, unconditional love. And that's the problem. We're so selfishly engaged in so many things. If we don't get what we thought we were going to get out of it, then we feel like, well, my expectations aren't fulfilled. Well, you had unrealistic expectations. It's when we choose to let God alone fulfill our human needs and desires, i.e., our expectations. You know what? It's good. God is good. And so the issue in the Christian life is literally living out the life of Christ. It's allowing Christ, the outlived Christ, to be the fulfillment, to be the expectation, our reason for being. That's the process, not some kind of religious measurement whereby we decide whether or not we're measuring up or whether we're getting all of our expectations fulfilled. The only measurement for the Christian is what?
is to have the wherewithal to be mindful of Christ being with us in every situation.
Amen.
Whether it's an expectation that is positive or negative, and then I think the second one is the fact that we are always mindful that this is not our home.
So the only measurement is Jesus and what he's revealing to us and whether we're accepting it or not. He is not measuring our performance, thank God. Our Christian life not based on what we do, but on what he's doing. And that's what we're losing sight. As you said, some of these situations we find ourselves in is not what we'd hoped for, not what we'd prayed for, and not what we wanted. But is God vacated in those circumstances? Obviously not. And so everything that he would desire to do in us, that should be really our own expectation.
It's so the opposite of the world system, though. I think that's the problem, is that we are so, one, as humans, we're just programmed that way, I think. But two, is our culture is also just repetitively hitting us with that plan constantly. Even in the religious arena, it's a very similar push. It's interesting to me, the occupation that I have and the struggle that I had with my own Christian walk in regards to performance, and just being able to realize that God, his mercy is unmerited. Like you're not gonna do X to produce Y. Like you can't plug a formula in and say this is how it's going to work. And some people teach that. I mean, I've been to different religious organizations that teach that way. But when you look at the reality of life, it doesn't pan out like that. You see horrible things happening to incredible people. You see amazing things happening to what you would consider terrible people. It's like you see random killings in our society. You see, all this crazy stuff. Then you pull politics into it. The expectations are just off the chain as far as what you think's going to happen, what actually happens, and then you start looking around, going, my gosh, is this how the rest of the country do they really think that way? It just never ends. But it is our system. It is the system of the world, and it's not. I would say it's countercultural to be able to, and it's not just positive thinking either. It's the ability to engage with a living God that has a plan, and he has a purpose. It's not an accident. When the expectation, the most desired expectation isn't met, it is no accident about the outcome. There is always a plan and a purpose. And if we can turn our attention to a God that is alive on the inside of us, it really makes more. It doesn't always explain the situation. Like, we don't always get an answer. We don't always get that aha where we go, oh, okay, that's why. But it also doesn't matter as much either.
Right, because we're experiencing his life. We're experiencing, as I like to say, life as God intended.
And sometimes it's just I'm just trusting. As all I can do is trust.
Amen.
And I also don't have to have answers for everybody else either.
Absolutely.
Sometimes we just got to trust that God has it in control. He's got this. And it's hard to do, but it's only hard to do when we want to control it.
Right. Yeah. As long as we're participating with God, there's, it's like I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Yeah. So when we're talking about what's hard, it's because we're trying to make it happen. And Jesus, we might say, is the easy button. He can do it. So I think we'll wrap this up so we don't get too long. We could go on for a long time and talk about this important subject. But the only expectation that we should have, I think I'll just quote the Apostle Paul in Romans chapter 11 and verse 36, because he says, "For from him and through him and to him are all things. To him be the glory forever. Amen. Thanks for coming in, Terry. This has been great.
Thank you, Don. It's always a pleasure.
We hope you were encouraged and blessed by this video. We would love to hear from you and get your feedback and interact with you. If you have a testimony that relates to today's discussion, please share it below in the comments, or send us an email with your inquiries or topic suggestions. We love to hear from you. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and click that notification bell so that you won't miss any of our broadcasts. Be sure to check out our blog on our website, LifeAsGodIntended.org, which is also in the description below. And if you would like to support our work financially, we have also provided a link for your tax-deductible donations. Until next time, may you experience life as God intended.